It started with a clip that wasn't even supposed to mean anything. A short interview moment, a few seconds of laughter, and a comment that sounded more like industry talk than a direct shot. But in hip-hop in 2026, nothing stays just a comment for long. Within hours, that clip was slowed down, re-uploaded, captioned, and turned into something bigger than what it originally was. And the name sitting in the middle of all this noise was Finesse2Tymes. The streets online started buzzing when 50 Cent's name got pulled into the conversation again, this time tied to a wider narrative involving Jay Prince and long-standing industry power structures. Suddenly, what looked like separate stories, interviews, old tension, and business talk, all got stitched together by the internet into one growing storm. And then Finesse2Tymes reacted, not with a long interview, not with a press statement, but with a tone shift people said they could feel more than hear. The kind of reaction that doesn't confirm anything directly, but also doesn't shut anything down. That silence in between energy is exactly what made people pay even closer attention. Because in this world, silence doesn't mean peace. It usually means someone is choosing what to say very carefully. Before any of this blew up, Finesse2Tymes had already built his name through struggle-heavy storytelling, jail time, survival narratives, and a comeback that the streets respected. 50 Cent, on the other hand, has always played the long game publicly, trolling, exposing, and keeping old industry wounds alive in interviews and online posts. And Jay Prince, he's not just a name in rap conversations. He's a figure people talk about in terms of influence, history, and behind-the-scenes power. Even mentioning him in a narrative shifts the temperature instantly. So when all three names started floating in the same space again, even indirectly, people didn't wait for confirmation. They started building theories. The earliest spark wasn't even a diss track or a direct statement. It was interpretation. A caption here, a repost there, an old clip resurfacing at the exact right time. Fans started connecting dots that may or may not have been meant to connect at all. And the emotional layer of it came from how quickly the tone changed online. What started as casual discussion turned into arguments about loyalty, respect, and who controls narratives in hip-hop. People weren't just watching a situation anymore. They were picking sides in something that was still forming. Finesse2Tymes' name kept getting pulled deeper into conversations about influence and pressure, even when he wasn't directly speaking. That's what made the situation feel heavier than a normal internet moment. The silence around him was being interpreted louder than any actual statement. And that's where the story really starts to shift. When perception starts moving faster than facts, and everyone begins reacting to a version of events that still hasn't been confirmed. By the time the conversation reached mainstream pages and commentary channels, it wasn't about one clip anymore. It was about power, influence, and old tensions being reinterpreted through a new lens. And somewhere in the middle of that noise, a much bigger question started forming. Was this just another internet misunderstanding that spiraled out of control, or the beginning of a much deeper industry alignment shift that nobody is openly naming yet? It didn't fully explode until a second clip entered the conversation. This time, it wasn't Finesse2Tymes talking directly about anything serious. It was a resurfaced moment from an older appearance where he casually mentioned industry pressure, loyalty, and how fast things can shift when bigger names start paying attention to smaller narratives. On its own, it meant nothing. But in the middle of a trending situation involving 50 Cent and Jay Prince, the internet treated it like a missing puzzle piece finally sliding into place. Within hours, commentary pages stitched the clips together. Timelines were created. Screenshots were highlighted, and captions started framing the situation like a developing storyline instead of separate events. And that's when the narrative stopped being about isolated comments and started becoming about alleged alignment and reaction. Then came the moment people keep referring to as the shift. A short-lived post, allegedly from someone within the extended circle of discussion, appeared and disappeared within minutes. It wasn't confirmed, it wasn't verified, but it was enough to set everything off again. The message suggested that what people were seeing online was only a surface-level version of a much older tension involving respect, business positioning, and misunderstood statements between different industry layers. By the time the screenshot spread, it had already been screenshotted, reposted, and recaptioned into multiple versions. Each version added slightly more drama, slightly more certainty, even though no one could verify the original source anymore. And that's where 50 Cent's name became central again in the conversation. Not because of a new statement, but because of how the internet interpreted his history of speaking on industry situations. Fans started pulling old interviews where he talked about control, influence, and behind-the-scenes conversations in hip-hop. Suddenly, those clips were being recontextualized as if they were directly connected to what was happening now. At the same time, Jay Prince's name started trending alongside it. Not through direct involvement, but through association, speculation, and long-standing narratives about influence in industry decisions. Even without any new verified action, his presence in the conversation alone changed the tone of how people were discussing the situation. Finesse2Tymes, meanwhile, remained mostly quiet in public spaces. But that silence didn't stop interpretation. It fueled it. Fans began analyzing every recent appearance, every caption, every interaction with other artists. Even neutral content started being framed as reaction behavior. And once that cycle begins, it becomes almost impossible to stop. Then came the first real shock twist moment that escalated everything. A live stream clip surfaced where someone close to conversation allegedly made a vague comment about misinformation spreading too fast. No names were mentioned, no direct accusations were made, but the timing was enough for the internet to latch onto it. People immediately connected it back to the ongoing narrative, even though the speaker never confirmed any link. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere, and the reaction split instantly. Some viewers believed it was subtle confirmation that things behind the scenes were more complicated than the internet understood. Others insisted it was just damage control for a situation that had been blown out of proportion. But the most important detail wasn't the clip itself. It was what it triggered, because after that moment, the conversation stopped being about interpretation and started becoming about credibility. People began questioning which sources were real, which clips were edited, and which narratives had been built purely from recycled content. And in the middle of that confusion, new speculation started forming, that multiple groups might be feeding different versions of the same story to shape public perception in different directions. That idea changed everything, because now the situation wasn't just who said what, it was who benefits from what people believe. And once that question entered the conversation, every earlier detail started getting reevaluated under a completely different lens. But even as confusion grew, one thing became clear. The story was no longer controlled by the original clips or comments. It was being controlled by reaction. And reaction, once it takes over, rarely slows down on its own. After the first wave of confusion settled, a second wave hit. And this one was louder, faster, and far more chaotic. What made it different wasn't new information. It was how aggressively old information started getting reinterpreted. Clips from months and even years ago were suddenly being treated like hidden context, and every small detail in those videos was now being scanned for meaning. The situation shifted again when another resurfaced moment involving Finesse2Tymes started circulating. It was a short interview segment where he spoke about watching how people move when bigger names get involved. At the time, it sounded like general industry awareness, but now it was being framed as if it directly referenced the current tension. That single shift in framing was enough to push the narrative into a new phase. Then 50 Cent's online presence reignited the conversation. Without directly addressing Finesse2Tymes or Jay Prince in any confirmed statement, he posted content that fans immediately connected to the situation. It wasn't explicit, but in hip-hop culture, ambiguity is often enough. Within minutes, comment sections filled with interpretations, screenshots, and theories trying to decode meaning from timing alone. And that's when the second major twist entered the story. A supposed internal conversation leak began circulating, again unverified, again fragmented, suggesting that the situation being discussed publicly was only one layer of a much older disagreement involving respect, miscommunication, and business-related tension that had never fully been resolved behind the scenes. The leak didn't confirm anything directly, but it introduced a new idea that the current narrative might just be a resurfacing of something that never actually ended. That changed how people viewed everything, because now it wasn't about a single reaction or a single moment. It was about history being reactivated. At the same time, Jay Prince's name continued trending alongside the conversation. Not because of new actions, but because of perception. Fans started pulling up old interviews, business discussions, and industry commentary to build a broader picture of influence and control. Even without new evidence, his presence in the narrative added weight to every theory being discussed online. Finesse2Tymes remained mostly quiet publicly, but that silence became its own talking point again. Some fans interpreted it as strategic distance, a way of avoiding unnecessary escalation. Others saw it as confirmation that there was more happening behind the scenes than anyone could safely speak on. And in the absence of clarity, both interpretations spread equally fast. Meanwhile, commentary channels and blogs started competing for attention by pushing increasingly detailed breakdowns of the situation. Timelines were reconstructed, old interviews were re-edited, and even unrelated industry moments were pulled into the conversation as possible connections. The more content that appeared, the less stable the original narrative became. And then came the moment that pushed everything into full escalation mode. A brief audio clip surfaced online claiming to be from a private discussion referencing misinterpretation of intent and people amplifying things beyond what was said. Like everything else in this story, it was unverified and quickly debated. But it didn't matter whether it was real or not. What mattered was a reaction, because the audio introduced doubt. And once doubt enters a viral narrative, certainty disappears fast. People who believed the situation was intentional started questioning whether it was actually a misunderstanding. People who believed it was overblown started wondering if there was a deeper structure they weren't seeing. And the entire conversation shifted from confidence to speculation. That uncertainty created the perfect environment for escalation. Now, every new post, every old clip, every silence was being treated like a clue in an ongoing case. And the more people analyzed, the more disconnected the story became from any single source of truth. And at the center of all this noise, one thing remained unchanged: no direct clarification from the main figures involved. Which meant the internet wasn't just reacting anymore. It was building the story in real time without them. By the time the conversation hit its peak, it wasn't just rap blogs talking anymore. It spread into everyday timelines, group chats, and comment sections where people normally don't even follow hip-hop news. What made it different this time was how emotionally invested the audience became. It stopped feeling like entertainment and started feeling like a live unfolding conflict. Even though most of it was built on interpretation and recycled clips, Twitter was the first place where the split became obvious. One side treated the situation like a misunderstood chain reaction, a bunch of clips and comments blown out of proportion by timing and audience bias. The other side treated it like a deeper industry pattern, where silence, indirect posts, and controlled messaging all pointed to something happening behind the scenes that no one was openly addressing. Reddit threads went even deeper. Users started building full timelines, linking old interviews from Finesse2Tymes, 50 Cent, and mentions of Jay Prince from unrelated years. They tried to construct a logical sequence out of scattered moments, even when there was no confirmed connection between them. Each thread added more detail, more speculation, and more confidence, even when the actual evidence stayed the same. On YouTube, commentary channels turned the situation into full breakdown content. Thumbnails used bold text, arrows, and cropped screenshots to suggest connections that were never officially confirmed. Some creators framed it as industry tension resurfacing, while others called it internet overreach. But regardless of stance, the engagement kept growing, and that alone pushed the narrative further. Fans reacted emotionally in a way that surprised even longtime observers of hip-hop culture. Some people felt frustration, saying the situation was being overanalyzed and stretched beyond recognition. Others felt a strange sense of loyalty toward the artists involved, defending them as if they were personally connected to the situation. Arguments broke out in comment sections, not just about facts, but about interpretation and belief. Meanwhile, a quieter reaction was happening among people closer to the industry space. Radio hosts and interviewers avoided directly addressing the topic unless necessary. When asked, most responses were carefully worded, neither confirming nor denying anything. That careful distance only added to the public curiosity, because silence in media spaces often feels like intentional avoidance rather than neutrality. What made the emotional fallout even stronger was how fast the story evolved without confirmation. Each new clip or post reset the conversation slightly, forcing people to reevaluate what they thought they understood. And because nothing was ever officially clarified, every version of the story remained possible in the minds of different audiences. In that environment, certainty disappeared completely. What remained instead was interpretation layered on interpretation. Fans weren't reacting to confirmed events anymore. They were reacting to versions of events shaped by edits, captions, and timing. And through all of it, the most consistent pattern stayed the same. No direct response from the central figures that the entire conversation was built around. That absence didn't slow the story down. It accelerated it. Because in the absence of answers, the audience doesn't wait. It fills the silence with its own. By the time the narrative reached its breaking point, the story had already moved far beyond the original clip that started everything. What remained wasn't a clear chain of events, but a layered web of interpretations, reposts, and theories that no one could fully trace back to a single origin anymore. And that's exactly where the final twist begins. In the gap between what was said and what was believed, a new detail started circulating late in the cycle, first appearing in small comment threads before spreading to larger pages. It suggested that the entire situation might have been built on a misread sequence of events, where timing, context, and selective editing turned neutral comments into something far more dramatic than originally intended. According to this version, multiple clips being shared weren't even part of the same timeline, but were stitched together by online momentum. And that's when everything shifted again, because people realized something uncomfortable. There was no single verified moment that confirmed the entire storyline the way it was being discussed. Instead, there were fragments, interviews, reactions, reposts, all interpreted through the lens of an already viral narrative. But the internet doesn't easily let go of a story once it reaches this level. So instead of slowing down, the conversation mutated. Now people began focusing on something else entirely, the silence itself. Why no clarification? Why no direct denial? Why no attempt to reset the narrative if so much of it was allegedly inaccurate? That silence became the new centerpiece of discussion, more important than any clip or quote. Then came the final twist that pushed the story into uncertainty again. A supposed behind-the-scenes claim began circulating suggesting that what people interpreted as reaction content from various figures, including posts, captions, and reposts, may not have been reactions at all, but unrelated content being framed into the ongoing narrative by audience interpretation. In other words, the story might not have been driven by the artist at all, but by how the audience was connecting unrelated signals. That idea changed the entire direction of conversation. Because now the question wasn't just what happened. It became, did anything actually connect the way people think it did? And that uncertainty hit harder than any previous twist. Fans who were once confident in their interpretations started rechecking timelines. Commentary channels began adjusting their breakdowns. Even the most detailed theories suddenly looked fragile when placed next to the possibility that the entire narrative was built from misalignment rather than intention. But even as doubt grew, the story didn't disappear. Instead, it evolved again, because ambiguity always keeps attention alive longer than clarity ever could. And somewhere in the middle of all that confusion, one final question remained unanswered. If so much of this was based on interpretation, then who, if anyone, actually controlled the story from the beginning? Or was the truth never in the hands of the people being talked about at all, but in the way millions of people chose to see it? So after everything that's been said, broken down, reposted, and reinterpreted, the real question still hasn't been answered. Was there ever a single clear moment that actually confirmed this entire situation the way the internet has been describing it? Or did a collection of unrelated clips, comments, and timing just slowly turn into a full narrative because people connected just that were never meant to be connected in the first place? Because this is where it gets interesting. Once a story reaches this level online, it stops being controlled by the people involved and starts being controlled by the audience watching it. Every repost adds weight. Every caption adds meaning. Every reaction creates momentum. And before anyone even realizes it, the story becomes real in the public mind, even if the original pieces were never meant to form that picture. And that's what makes the situation different from just another hip-hop headline. It's not just about Finesse2Tymes, 50 Cent, or Jay Prince anymore. It's about how fast interpretation can turn into narrative, and how quickly narrative can feel like fact when it's repeated enough times across different platforms. So now the question is simple. Do you think this was a real behind-the-scenes industry situation that's just being carefully handled without public confirmation? Or do you think the internet took separate moments and built a story out of them that never fully existed in that form? Drop your thoughts in the comments, not just what you believe, but why you believe it. Because in situations like this, the loudest voice isn't always the truth. It's just the version that spreads the fastest.